What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Thursday today, January 30th. We're getting closer to the end of the month here, and we got some more football to talk about. On today's schedule, we got some stories around the NFL revolving a little bit about the Super Bowl and also just some things around the league in this down period before we get to the actual Super Bowl. Actually, today also, I just reminded myself that the Pro Bowl is starting in about 35 minutes or so, so that's something that we got to look forward to at least this week. But on this show, we're going to discuss Matthew Stafford apparently planning to return for 2025. Could it be his last season, or could there still be a little bit more there for Matthew Stafford to play with the Los Angeles Rams? We're going to go over that decision and what it could mean also for the Rams going forward. And also, Saquon Barkley, obviously a major part of the Eagles' success this season, but has it been overshadowing the real most valuable piece to the Eagles team overall, to their success, right? We're going to have a little bit of a discussion there and talk about both sides when we get to it, but that and some more coming up on today's show. So make sure to stick around and find out what we're going to talk about later on in the show. But for right now, if you guys have any questions or comments or any opinions that you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so, because your input and insight is always very much appreciated on these live shows. We always love to hear what you guys are thinking, get a different perspective on anything that we're talking about, and that way, just making the show a little bit more diverse. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message gets on the air and it gets featured, there's an easy way to do that just by using the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, because I'll be able to read it out loud, and just share any thoughts that you guys have on any of the topics. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, if you want to get involved with the show, hit the Super Chat button, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and let us know what's on your mind. So with that now out of the way, we can start discussing the first piece of news that we got on today's show regarding Matthew Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams. After the Rams fell to the Eagles in the divisional round, Matthew Stafford said that he would take some time to think about his future, and, he is entering his 17th season now, and, he was going to take some time to go over things. I believe he's going to be, 37 as well going into next season. So obviously a lot to think about, right? He's closer to the end of his career than the start of it, obviously. And if you remember last year, there was some talk potentially of him thinking about retiring, or at least thinking of the possibility that it was getting closer and closer. And this offseason was no different. He said that he was going to take some time to think about it, but this time around, it didn't last as long as last offseason, because as we learned last night from Ian Rappaport, he reported that Matthew Stafford does plan to return in 2025. He's communicated that to the Los Angeles Rams already, and it's great news, obviously, for them. Sean McVay, I mentioned Sean McVay because he said after the season was over and everything like that, and he was asked a question about Matthew Stafford and his future, he also said that he'd rather know sooner rather than later, because of, obviously, a bunch of decisions that they have to make and the planning already for next season and shaping the acquisitions, the extensions around Matthew Stafford, right? Obviously, because of who he is, also his position and things like that. That's something that you have to know pretty early in the process. So, it only lasted 6 days, right? It was 6 days ago that he said that, so now he has his answer, and Matthew Stafford will be entering his 17th season in the NFL, and he'll also turn 37, like I said before. So, well, that's awesome. Well, it's great for Los Angeles to get their quarterback back, at least for one more season, after winning the division and getting to the divisional round. I mentioned, Stafford's 17th season and things like that in 37, but he really hasn't compared to maybe other older quarterbacks, he hasn't really shown me a lot that I'm like, ooh, like he is getting a little bit older. Like that didn't look great. He's still throwing the ball very well, very accurate. He still has the same velocity on that, and a lot of the success is predicated on him and how well he operates still among some of the best in the NFL. Right? I think it wouldn't be crazy to put him up there like top 7, top 6 still at 37 years old, which is great to see. And obviously the Rams want to keep that around as long as possible. But the topic now, the task at hand right now will be Matthew Stafford's contract and how they addressed that topic going forward now. And if you guys remember, this was a topic last offseason as well, but his deal was restructured, it was revised in some way. We actually didn't get too much information from it at the time. So we know that it was restructured, and we know that that was settled over pretty well, that Stafford had no problem deal, and he's set to have a $49.6 million cap hit for 2025, and then an additional $53.6 million in 2026. And with those two cap hits, only $4 million is fully guaranteed in 2025, and he has no guaranteed money if he so chooses to play his last year on that contract. He has no guaranteed money in 2026. So of course, the Rams would want to lower that cap hit for at least this year, right? So because of that feeling that most people get from the Rams and just basic logic, right, to lower that cap number, obviously that's not something that you would ideally want to have, right? But because of that, sources believe that Matthew Stafford is actually unlikely to return to Los Angeles without that restructuring of his contract. And on that topic, right, if they don't come to an agreement for whatever reason, whatever reality we live in where Matthew Stafford does not play for the Rams this season, if he wasn't able to do that and they weren't able to come to an agreement, the Rams could save around $27 million by trading him or cutting him after June 1st. I believe it's around like $5 million or $27 million that, within that range, if it's a trade or a cut right after June 1st, right, it'll vary depending on what they decide to do. So that's also a possibility, but Ian Rappaport also said that the Rams are not showing any indication that they want to go down that path. They very much want to have Matthew Stafford as their quarterback because they believe they're in a position to win right now, right? In the next year or two, they believe they're going to have their best chance to win with their current team. So they could potentially, do some salary cap gymnastics there and move around that cap number, restructure it again, maybe give him more guaranteed money as an option. I'm sure Matthew Stafford would love that. Anybody would. So, there's a lot of things they could do, not to get into the specifics because we don't actually know. But, they have a couple options, and the Rams, again, are not even probably remotely thinking of, let's just wait out. Maybe we could get a quarterback in the draft. It's nothing like that. They're very much on board with Matthew Stafford. And, thinking on this portion of the segment, right, on the contract, and it makes me think back to knowing that there's probably going to be a restructuring. Why not, put it out there at least in the universe that, we want to kind of have an answer sooner rather than later. So it gives you more time to go over that restructuring. There's more time to negotiate rather than holding it off and putting everything on a pause. And, in some circumstance, maybe Matthew Stafford doesn't come back and the Rams put everything on hold just for Matthew Stafford not to come back, right? You don't want to go down that route. So Sean McVay, got the answer pretty quickly, less than a week, and now they have all this time to restructure that deal, knowing that Matthew is thinking of playing again, at least for one more year. And, if we were to speculate and live in the hypothetical, like oftentimes, we do in media, if for whatever reason Matthew Stafford did end up in trade talks or release talks, teams instantly would covet him more than anybody else because a lot of these teams are just a quarterback away. You think of the Jets potentially, the Steelers, the Raiders aren't a quarterback away, but they sure would love to have Matthew Stafford, I'm sure. So that's in my mind, like about 10% chance that that would ever happen, but you never know, right? Crazier things have happened. So if that were to happen, Stafford would immediately be the number one target for everybody, right, that needs a quarterback. So that would be interesting. That would be bananas if that actually happened. But, I don't think it will at this point. And Los Angeles also doesn't have a legit answer after Matthew Stafford, right? So to say that they could ever get to a place where they want to trade him or release him, there's not really anything else to go for, right? A lot of these quarterback needy teams are stuck in this position this year where they're like, man, like the draft looks all right, or free agents, do we want to pay him that much money, or are we just going to stay with our same guy, right? It's a very tough moment to kind of live in right now. Nothing really fills you with a lot of anticipation, right? So it's a weird area right now for a lot of these teams that just need a quarterback. So the Rams, now knowing that they still have Stafford, I'm sure they'd much rather build around him and add guys like linebackers, defensive backs, right, that they desperately need to try and make another run at it at the Super Bowl. They were very close this year, and all their young talent is only going to get better. So they got a bright future, or at least this nice window with Matthew Stafford to really take advantage of it, and I expect them to be, or at least I expect us to be talking about them probably in a year's time from now, right? Around this same divisional round conference championship. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. So they have their quarterback. So that is a great move and a great relief, I'm sure, for all Rams fans that they now know Stafford will be back. But speaking about the Rams and moving on to our next segment, we're going to talk about the team that beat them and discuss a little bit about the Philadelphia Eagles, Saquon Barkley, or the Eagles defense, which has been more valuable to the team's success in 2024-2025, right? It seems like there's an obvious answer, but we're going to go more in depth in it and just discuss it here on the show. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with that after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back here on the show, and to continue our discussion into this next segment, we're going to bring up another topic here with the Philadelphia Eagles. Not so much just focusing on this game at hand, the Super Bowl upcoming, right? Obviously, we still got a lot of time for that, but a little bit of how we got here, right? And discussing this team a little bit more in detail, because I believe the Eagles are the most complete team in the NFL. You look around up and down their roster, it's kind of crazy how almost at every position you look at who's starting, and almost every position is filled by arguably one of the best players in the NFL at that position, right? Obviously, Saquon, the entire offensive line, probably the best left tackle, left guard, right guard, even a little bit. So you got that. Jalen is obviously up there in some discussions as a very good quarterback. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith is a very good number 2. I don't even consider him that. They got 2 number 1s. Dallas Goedert, underrated tight end. And then the defense as well. You can go up and down those positions and list out how many of those players are actually already considered among some of the best in the NFL. It's crazy. It's crazy how Howie Roseman and this team have built this roster up, and that's where we've sort of gotten to this position, and then just adding Saquon on top of everything, right? It's a little bit just like overkill. It's too much. It's too much. Like it's the Warriors with Steph, Clay, and KD, right? It feels just overwhelmingly just unfair to some extent, but with the addition of Saquon, like I mentioned, right, you wouldn't be wrong in saying that he's been a monumental reason for why they're back in the Super Bowl, right? Because you look at this team and how similar it is to the last two, teams that the Eagles have had, right? The majority of the players are still there, right? You lose guys like Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce, not anything to sneeze at, obviously, two Hall of Fame players there. But, for the majority of it, you still have almost the same players on offense. The offensive line has seen some changes, but still, you got your pillars there as well. The receivers are still pretty much the same. The defense has added, the likes of Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Quinyon Mitchell, but again, still mostly a bunch of the same guys. But Saquon being added now, it's been a monumental difference, right? And, he should have broken the rushing record. They made their identity very much about running the ball and basing this play off of Saquon, right? Virtually the same guys, but he's added another dimension of elite level that, again, that's why I feel like it's almost unfair to an extent, right? With him, he's getting at least 100 yards in each playoff game, which is insane. He scored 5 times already, and it's just a perfect match when you pair up that offensive line with a guy, at the end of the day, he was selected number 2 overall in a draft, right? No running back. Nobody would ever dare say in any upcoming draft, I would predict that in any upcoming draft, even this one and anyone down the line, that no running backs probably ever going to be drafted in the top 2. I don't really foresee that happening just of the way the NFL is. And Saquon, was that good that he was selected number 2, right? And you pair him with this offensive line, it's nuts, but we do have that moment where you kind of pause, right? Because you also wouldn't be so far off accuracy when you highlight their defense also as a part of this team that's really been underrated, but just arguably as valuable, some might say, as Saquon has been to this team, right? Not a lot of people talk about the defense, right, as much as Saquon, because Saquon has put up historical numbers. He's jumping over people backwards. He's taking touchdowns back, like 60, 70 yards, multiple times already. It's nuts, and it draws you in very much, right? But the defense has been pretty remarkable, the way that they've turned things around from last year to this year. The extent of how they've done that has been, again, remarkable, right? Because you look at this defense last year, and last year they ranked 30th in scoring defense. They were 26th in total defense. They were 31st in passing defense, and they were 30th in points allowed in the NFL. All last year with a bunch of the same guys, right? But then this year, you add a lot of great pieces, right, that I'm going to get to. But this year, they're second in scoring defense, first in total defense, first against the pass, and second overall in points allowed. They've only allowed 17 points, 17 or 18 points per game during the regular season. You go from quite literally almost bottom 3 in everything to top 3 the very next year. Is a remarkable turnaround, and we've seen it, play out with how they're able to get to the quarterback with ease. The coverage on the backside is tremendous, right? It's hard to argue that anybody does it better than Quinyon Mitchell, Darius Slay, Cooper DeJean back there as well. And, some of those guys are those new additions that have helped change the picture here for the Eagles defense, like DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, we were big fans of, right, coming into the draft. And he was drafted, it looks like, to the perfect spot. And not only drafting guys, but signing guys like Zach Bond, who's an all-pro player now. Bringing back C.J. Gardner-Johnson, developing guys like Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis. All these guys are hitting like that first moment where you're thinking, all right, like these guys are established now, they're getting it, and they're starting to flourish in their roles, and are even, taking steps above that. And when you have all of them doing it at the same time, you get results like this, right? All these Georgia players, right? They all went to Georgia, right? Nolan Smith, Jalen, Nakobe Dean, and Jordan Davis, they're all playing at an exceptional level. And of course, you can't go without mentioning Vic Fangio. The coordinators were obviously different last year, and now this year they bring in a lot more experience, and Vic Fangio is able to help this defense reach their maximum potential. So he can't go unmentioned as well. So when you talk about Saquon and this defense, right, in terms of who is more valuable for the turnaround, if you want to call it that, or just the fact that they've made it back to a Super Bowl, who's more valuable in that regard? I think it's an interesting topic, right? Because you could go down a lot of different routes, right? If you just believe offense is more valuable, you're probably going to go with Saquon. Or if you really value defense now more than ever, right, with the NFL shifting to a more offensive-based league, right? All the biggest stars are offensive players, right? If you still value defense, you'll talk about how underrated this Eagles defense is and how it's not really talked about as much. And I think to kind of give my answer on where I feel this debate sort of lies and where we can find an answer, I think Kellen Moore has been just as important as well. Just as important as Vic Fangio is, Kellen Moore being added to this team has been a tremendous thing, right? And I don't want to sound like I'm minimizing Saquon, because again, he's doing like beyond athletic, beyond just like normal top tier running back things. He is remarkable out there. But I think with the addition of Kellen Moore, not that any other running back would give you similar results, but you bring in a guy like, I'm trying to think who was like a free agent. If they brought in like Tony Pollard or like Josh Jacobs even as well too, who's a very good running back, but there wasn't a lot of free agent ones that I can think of right now other than Tony Pollard. Or like if they kept DeAndre Swift or anything like that. If they kept Swift, let's say that. If they kept DeAndre Swift and they didn't go after Saquon, like the Giants should have re-signed him, then I feel like they would have been very close to being back here again. And I don't think that's at any sort of disregard to what Saquon's been able to do, right? Because it's just been a little bit like OD what Saquon's done, right? It's just been like too much. It's been unfair, like I said before. But if the defense was just as bad as last year, and they didn't have the influx of talent and the development from this defense and, drafting guys that were perfect fits, they already would have lost to the Packers, and if not them, they would have lost to the Los Angeles Rams. So I think you could kind of get by a little bit more on the offensive side if you, say, took away Saquon and you kept DeAndre Swift. I don't think this Eagles team would be like a wild card team or anything like that, right? I still think they would probably be within the first or third seed in the NFC, and they would have probably likely ended up back here again in another Super Bowl without Saquon. Again, not to minimize what he's done, but I think with this defense, the way they've been able to go literally from bottom 3 in the league to top 3 now in a bunch of stats, I think that's been a huge difference. And if I was to pick, I would say the defense has been a little bit more valuable with their timely turnovers. They could bring a lot of pressure from the inside or outside. And again, the communication and the effort and the coverage on the backside has been tremendous. And a lot of people I see talk about the Eagles defense say that they're just, that the effort's one thing, but to me it just feels like they're moving more now and they're operating as just one unit, right? When one guy goes to cover somewhere, or he knows he has an assignment somewhere else, on the field, everybody else knows like what they're supposed to do, and they're kind of moving all on a rope, it looks like, right? Like all the defensive linemen are moving in sequence with each other. Same thing with the linebackers and the secondary as well. You hardly ever see someone out of place or someone being somewhere where they're not supposed to be. I think that's been one of the biggest differences this year. And in the Super Bowl, if we're going to talk about it just a little bit here, right, I think this defense, because Saquon's going to be a big portion of the game, and that the Chiefs are also going to try and take away Saquon, obviously, right? So he might not be making a massive impact, or he could be, you never know, but I'm presuming that the Chiefs are going to try and make the Eagles play left-handed, so they're going to try their best at trying to take away Saquon. But with this defense, I don't think there's any room for, we could be potentially taken out of the game, or the Chiefs offense is going to try and minimize the impact of this player. Like, that can't happen, right? I still think the Eagles could potentially win this game. If Saquon has 70 yards or 80 yards or something like that, I still believe they can be in this game. But with the defense, if they're not playing to the level that they have been, they have no chance. They have no chance because they need to make an impact in this game outside of field goals, allowing only a couple or one touchdown or anything like that, or just 3 and outs. They need to have a forced fumble. They need to have a strip sack. They need to have an interception, or one of those things need to happen, I feel like, for the Eagles to win this year's Super Bowl, right? Again, with the offense, I don't necessarily think that you need Saquon to run for $140 and 2 touchdowns, right? I don't think they necessarily need that, because I have some more belief than maybe some people do in Jalen, but they're talented enough on offense to get the job done with Saquon playing a quote-unquote bad game, right? Because the bad game for him is 80 yards. That's still, I believe, something that they can do, but without their defense, I really don't give them a big opportunity to win this game. That's just how I see it, right? Because their defense has really been a hurdle, just an immovable object for the Rams or the Packers, right? In moments in those games, you felt like they were close, like they could be close to doing something, maybe coming back in the game, but it was always a forced fumble, an interception in the Packers game, turnovers galore in the Commanders game that have made the difference every single time. So I just feel like that defense needs to play like that, essentially, right? There's no room for error. That's why I think they're more valuable. But for you guys can let me know what you think. I just thought that was an interesting piece of discussion that we could bring up on today's show. But for right now, we're going to move on, and we're going to discuss some more things, right? Looking at the bigger picture and looking at the entire playoff landscape so far. Now that we're already at the Super Bowl, we're going to look back a little bit and rank our top 5 playoff performers of this year's playoffs. I got a list here on my top 5 on who I believe has been the most impactful players in this year's playoffs. So don't go anywhere. Come back and find out who are the top 5 most impactful players so far in these playoffs.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Diving back into the action now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast. If you are just joining the show, we just finished talking about Saquon Barkley and the Eagles defense, having a discussion about them, who is most valuable to the Eagles, as well as giving our reactions to Matthew Stafford coming back and playing in 2025. But now looking ahead to this segment, as you guys can see on the screen, we're going to be ranking the top 5 performers in the playoffs so far. Now that we're one game away, we're just one more Sunday away from the NFL season being over, I thought I'd look at these playoffs and think, like, who has elevated their performance in this year's playoffs, right? There's been a lot of stories, there's been a lot of upsets, a lot of surprising results, and just a lot of big plays that have been made that I thought I would highlight some of those players that maybe some people aren't talking about as much, but also some pretty household names, if you will, right? For some of the performances in this year's playoffs. So, starting with number 5, the 5th player that I think, or actually, scratch that. Before I get to the 5, I got to give some honorable mentions. Just a couple, just 3 of them. Travis Kelce was one of them. He had a very impressive game against the Texans, but I would have liked to have seen him a little bit more involved against the Bills. Terry McLaurin, he scored, I believe, in every game that he played, and he really showed up as their true number 1. So I had to give him a shout out as well. And Jahmyr Gibbs. Again, he only played 1 game, but the way that he was trending and the way that he played in that game, if they would have stayed alive and continued to play, I think he was in for a very prosperous playoff run. But unfortunately, they lost. So now we can get to number 5. And at number 5, I have Xavier Worthy, the rookie wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is the 5th most impactful player, the 5th best player in this year's playoffs, because he looks like their go-to receiver to me, right? When they need to move the change, they need a big play down the field, or just in terms of just in being impactful as soon as you're on the field, I don't think any other Chiefs receiver does that other than the Hall of Famer and Travis Kelce, obviously, right? But no actual wide receiver that they have. You put on the field and you think, and you have to know like where he is at all times, right? Hopkins has the legacy and has the reputation, right? Obviously, but currently, I think Xavier Worthy makes more of an impact just based on natural God-given ability that he's the fastest ever recorded 40-yard dash in the NFL. So there's that aspect of it, right? Speed kills. Everybody needs to know where he is at all times. But I think as the season has gone on and he's grown a little bit through it, and he's also, been thrown right into like the thick of things, right? With the injury to Rashee Rice, Pacheco going down, Hollywood Brown basically not playing all year, he's had to be out there a lot, and he's learned a lot, and I think he's taken it in a very good stride, again, only as a rookie receiver. And he leads the Chiefs so far in receptions in the playoffs, in targets in the playoffs, and has 130 yards so far, which is only second to Travis Kelce at 136. And to me, he just has the most dynamic look to him, just how, and he just makes like impactful plays, where he had that catch against the Bills this past weekend where I think it was Corey Bishop, I think it's the Bills player's name. It's something Bishop. Him and Xavier Worthy went up, had a contested ball up there, and Worthy came down with it, and that eventually led to some points for the Kansas City Chiefs. So he's made impactful plays, he scored some touchdowns, and it's not like he has like 4 receptions and like 5 targets, right? He clearly is someone that the Chiefs want to get the ball to and want to have impact the game because they know he's capable of it. So I had to include him on this list just because he's also exceeded some expectations as well. So I've been very pleased with what I've seen from Xavier Worthy. And that brings me to number 4, which is the most underrated guy on this list. I would say Dallas Goedert has been the 4th most impactful player in this year's playoffs, because for helping your quarterback as much as anybody, I think Dallas Goedert has been a huge, not sigh of relief, but just a security target for Jalen Hurts, right? I think he's been huge for Jalen Hurts in that regard, knowing that you have a tight end that you could just, release out into the flat, or have just a choice, an option route lined up for him, or that can beat you up the seam, that can beat one-on-one coverage, that can just be a problem out there for opposing defenses, is a great thing to have for quarterbacks, especially one where, Jalen might not be asked to throw the ball a lot, so those throws are very valuable. You have a very reliable target in Dallas Goedert, and he's been exactly that, because he leads the Eagles in yards at 188, in receptions with 15, and he, much like A.J. Brown and I believe Jahan Dotson, are the only receivers that have caught a touchdown, right? No other Eagles player, receiving-wise, has more than one touchdown. So he leads in all those categories, right, so far through the playoffs. And I think A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith draw a lot of attention that allows Goddard to take advantage of it. And he's always available for Jalen Hurts. He's always there for him. And I think having Goddard there has allowed Jalen to get more in rhythm a lot of the times. He's made some big-time throws to him, and Dallas Goedert, has just made the reliable play each and every time. And one thing that always stuck with me, kind of as a side note, is following the Steelers and Mike McCarthy, God no. Mike Tomlin, following Mike Tomlin, he always has, his Tomlinisms, right? And one of them was, players that can do routine things routinely. And I think that's the perfect embodiment for Dallas Goedert. I think he's exactly that for the Philadelphia Eagles, helping them get to another Super Bowl. And that is only number 4, though, right? We couldn't put Dallas Goedert too far ahead on this list. At number 3, I gave it to James Cook for a couple reasons, right? I feel like the Bills changed their identity a lot this year, and it was very predicated on the run, right? The run, they were a run-first team. A lot of it came off of the success of the running ability of Josh, James Cook certainly, but also spotting him with Ty Johnson and guys like Ray Davis. But James Cook, he led the Bills in all categories, but also only second to Saquon Barkley in the postseason in terms of running back stats. But in terms of rushing on the Bills, he's been the leader in every single statistic, and I thought the Bills clearly looked as their best version in that second half when, he ends up scoring and they have that long drive where they just ran the ball right at the Chiefs defense. I thought that's when the Bills hit their peak, unfortunately, in this game. And, after that, it quite wasn't to that same level. And it was a shame because I think also that's another reason why I had James Cook on here, because I believe that if James Cook would have been more involved, maybe during that drive, obviously, where Josh doesn't convert, that Hail Mary kind of throw down the field, I feel like if they would have just got James Cook a little bit more involved and they got him the ball a bit more during that, it could have not changed the outcome of the game, because I don't know that, but I feel like they would have put themselves in a little bit more of a manageable situation when it comes to, facing a fourth down, right? Maybe you wouldn't have been in 4th and 10 or whatever it was. So I think that was something that goes unspoken a lot of the times, and, his level of play never really dropped. He had 2 touchdowns against the Chiefs and 120 yards against the Broncos, still very impactful against the Ravens. So I had to give it to James Cook at the number 3 spot. But then number 1 and number 2 were pretty obvious, I would say. At number 2, I gave it to Saquon for obvious reasons, right? I don't really have to list all of them out, but just to talk about a couple, right? He's had 118 yards each game. He has 5 touchdowns, and instead of throwing the ball down the field as your big, game-changing, momentum-swinging kind of plays for the Eagles, it always feels like it's a Saquon run that's like 50 yards, 70 yards, 60 yards, or something like that. That's the kind of impact that Saquon has on this team. So I had to put Saquon at number 2, obviously, for that reason, and the impact that he had in the regular season as well, right? It doesn't just go unnoticed. But at number 1, the best player in this year's playoffs, I thought, was Jaden Daniels. And the difference between him and Saquon, I believe, is that, again, going back to the last segment a little bit, not that Saquon's not important and that I want to diminish his impact, but I feel like, again, with other running backs, maybe with like DeAndre Swift or any other running back maybe that they picked up in free agency that was available, like Aaron Jones or something like that, right? If Aaron Jones was on this team, I feel like they wouldn't be so far off of where they are right now. I feel like with Jaden, like like, his level of play and his impact on this Commanders team is second to none, right? He elevated the performance of everybody. Without him, they're nowhere near where they are now, and they're nowhere near the NFC Conference Championship game. That's insane. And he's exceeded everyone's expectations. He's been definitely what a lot of people expected, but a lot more, right? Getting to where they are right now. And of course, people will say it's a team game and that a lot of people contributed to it, but not as much as Jaden, right? Everything was on his shoulders when it comes to the run game, the pass game, making the right decisions, in play calling and whatnot. I think that falls heavily on Jaden. And as a rookie player, to have all those responsibilities and take them this far, I think to me that's insurmountable. So I have to have him as my number one player in this year's playoffs. What he's been able to do has been historic. So I put him at number one, and the rest of the list I thought was pretty self-explanatory. So we're going to leave my thoughts and that ranking right there before we enter another break, the last one of the show, and not the last one of the show, the second to last one, and we look ahead to the kickoff format. That'll be coming up in the next segment, looking back on a year where the NFL implemented this new dynamic kickoff rule, and now that the regular season has been over for some time now, what are the statistics and the feedback? What has the feedback been with this new kickoff format? Has it been a success, or do people not like it? We're going to talk about it when we return after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you guys for joining me back here on the show, and something that we talked about at the beginning of the season, and actually really a lot during the off season, and how impactful it could be to the NFL, was this new kickoff format, right? The whole new look of what kickoffs were supposed to be and how it would be received by the players and the fans and everything like that, how different it really looked. And now, after its first year, we definitely got some answers that we were looking for in terms of how impactful this new kickoff dynamic rule really was. Because prior to this season, last season, the NFL saw the lowest rate of kickoff returns in NFL history. Only 22% of the kickoffs were returned in 2023. So this past offseason, right, there was this whole big deal that the NFL had to do something about it, and they came to a final answer, and we got what we got this year, right? The new kickoff format, and they implemented it from watching a little bit of the XFL and bringing that model over to what we got now in this new kickoff format, right, in the NFL, right? And it's made a pretty big impact, I would say, right? Now, after the first year, the first trial run, if you will, the NFL Executive Vice President Jeff Miller spoke to reporters yesterday about the results from transitioning over to this new format in terms of the kickoffs. And he said in his statement that there was a 57% increase in kickoff returns this year compared to 2023. And while Miller didn't go into any specific numbers, he also said that the average starting field position also improved, along with the number of returns also improved, and there was less injuries recorded this season. And then, to add on to that, there was the NFL operations website that stated that you could see that there was 332 more returns this past season compared to the year before, and 59 of those 332 went for at least 40 yards or more. That's the most that there's been in a single NFL season since 2016, and also 7 kickoff returns for touchdowns in the regular season compared to only 4 before that in 2023. And those 7 kickoff returns were the most in the NFL since 2021. So there's a lot of firsts, there's a lot of numbers, and there's a lot of just statistics I just threw out there. But I think through some of the adjusting, I think the new dynamic kickoff has been, I think it's been the smoothest incorporation to the NFL in terms of the changes that were made last offseason with some of the rules, at the NFL owners meeting and things like that, with the owners and executives all there, and they vote on these changes. I think that the kickoff rule has been the smoothest looking one out of all, the changes that they made. And I think it's also been the most impactful one also, because there was a point there last season where people were talking about the kickoffs and how irrelevant they were, and just how it felt so unnecessary to have them, especially if guys were just not going to take them out, because there was no incentive to actually return them, right? And for how exciting it is and how impactful kickoff returns can really be, right, to get to a low point where you're starting to talk about maybe we just shouldn't have it, or what else are we supposed to do? And then for them to implement this new rule, kind of go outside the box and go to the XFL and see this and implement it and also change it a little bit to something that fits, I think, very well now, has been a huge success. And they've gotten the positive feedback that they were after with a move like this. And the statistics also show that it's been what the NFL intended, all in all, with the injuries as well, right? The old kickoff format was extremely dangerous because everything was very high speed. Everything was high impact, high speed, big hits, and you just never really knew how or when someone could receive one of those massive hits. So I think now it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more, I guess, planned out in a way, but it's definitely looked better in terms of everything that we said, right? The returns, the average return, how many times people are willing to actually have kickoff returns has been a pretty big part of it. And with that being said, I still think there's a little bit more work to do here with the new kickoff rule, just because it's good. I mean, it's made a big impact, and I'm a big fan of it. But I still think, and I'm still hanging on the fact that that I feel like touchbacks with this new kickoff format should be at the 35-yard line. And it seems crazy to say that because we've seen a 57% increase in the kickoffs, which is a phenomenal number, right? A phenomenal jump in how frequent people are returning these kickoffs. But I think you could even reach a new height and a different level by bringing it out a little bit more. Because now, if you bring it out to the 35, I think the 40 is too much. But if you go to the 35, now it changes the mindset of who's defending and who's actually kicking off. Because there would be a lot less kickoffs through the back of the end zone if you put it out to the 35-yard line as the starting position. Because basically, that's almost like the 40 already. Virtually it's like starting as close as you can to the 40-yard line without actually being there, right? If you kick it out of bounds is when you could do that. But if you bring it out to the 35 a little bit more, now I think you put kickers and kickoff teams in a very new area where kickers got to start aiming their kicks very accurately for them to kick it in the landing zone and force these guys to return it, or kind of roll into the end zone and still hit the landing zone. But if you have an effect on it, if you can make it as tough as possible on the receiving team, it's going to force kickers to be a little bit more skillful in that way, not just booting it as hard as they can through the back of the end zone, right? It's going to require a lot more ability and skill. And I think that's something that's exciting for the special teams unit, because one of the big reasons that they wanted to incorporate kickoffs back again is because they wanted to have some impact coming from special teams units, right? They wanted that to still be a very important part of the game, and you really didn't get that when everybody was calling for a fair catch about a year or two ago. So they wanted to change that, and now not only have you given the special teams units more of an opportunity to go out there and actually affect the game, but all the players that are only on special teams, some of the younger guys that are on special teams, they have an opportunity to go out there and make a play and make a name for themselves and actually impact the game, not once in a while just go out there and, half try and kind of run out like 15 yards before it's a touchback anyway. So I like that, and not only that, but you increase the level of difficulty, which I think is only going to bring out the best, even more of the best, on some of these special teams players, definitely the kickers, and you elevate the level a little bit more as well, which is, I think, what the NFL wants to do, right? Increase the quality of their product. So I think kickers are going to get a lot more respect. They're going to be looked at in a whole different view if, you got a very skillful kicker that's able to make kickoffs as hard as possible and just make it extremely difficult and annoying for these kickoff return teams to actually get something productive from it. I think that would also benefit the NFL, and that's only one thing, right? Bringing it out to the 35-yard line, I think, would be the most impactful. But also, I think that they got to do something about these onside kicks, because it feels a little bit like you're inching towards irrelevancy a little bit. Like the onside kicks, yes, we've seen a couple of them, but I still think that should be a bigger part of the game, regardless if it's the old format or this new format where you get maybe like 3 onside kick recoveries or something like that, or just a handful of them. I think that could be an area where the NFL experiments with it a little bit more, and hopefully off of the back of this success with changing the kickoff format completely, maybe they could add something to the onside kick, or maybe not make it a surprise anymore, or maybe just scratching it, or not scratching it, but just adding another alternative on instead of that. And I'm, for one, a very big fan of like putting the onside kick team in a scenario where it's like 4th and 25 or like 4th and 20, and you have to convert that to get the ball back. I think that would be something pretty cool that you can think about. And then if you actually like it and maybe make some tweaks to it, you could think about implementing a scenario like that and giving teams that option in the late portion of the fourth quarter. I think not only would that be super awesome, but it would change, again, the emotions, the stipulations, everything about a game. If a team converts like a 4th and 25 to get the ball back, then the game, I think, just adds or gets added a whole different level of momentum being switched over to the other side, and it's just complete mayhem at that point if they're able to do something like that. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but really the biggest thing I want to see is just something to make the onside kick of some importance, right? I don't want to see a team announce an onside kick and just think like, oh, like they're not going to get the ball back anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right? I want to see it be impactful, right? I want to have hope. I want to have some hope that they could potentially recover it. But I guess we're going to go through each step of it, right? We can't have everything at once. So it feels like the new kickoff rule has been a success. I believe it has been, and hopefully it propels the NFL to making some other changes, right? Maybe not being so hesitant about making them, right? They've already made a move like this. Hopefully it makes it easier. But in terms of moving on and looking ahead, we got one more segment to get to. Just a quick update on some coaching hires, this time related to the New York Jets. They hired 2 more coaches to Aaron Glenn's coaching staff over the last few days that I'm just going to go over, and we're going to recap it here to end the show. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in just a few seconds. We are back here for the last segment of today's show, and I thought I'd just recap a little bit of some coaching news that we got over the last couple of days. The New York Jets continue filling out their coaching staff this week, and after some speculation on some potential candidates for defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, special teams, right? We talked about it briefly when Aaron Glenn got the job. But now we got confirmation yesterday that veteran assistant coach in the NFL, Steve Wilks, has been announced as the new defensive coordinator for the New York Jets. But not only Steve Wilks, also the Jets are hiring former Denver assistant special teams coach Chris Banjo to be their new special teams coach as well. So mainly on Steve Wilks, because that's a pretty recognizable name for some people that follow the NFL, right? Steve Wilks is a more household name than Chris Banjo, right? This is a pretty new opportunity for Chris Banjo, right? Because he's still pretty new in coaching. To have a position like this is exciting for Banjo, but really for Steve Wilks, he took this past year off. He actually didn't coach this past year. He took a break after helping the 49ers reach the Super Bowl last season. But surprisingly, to a lot of people's surprise, he was fired after that game. And it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I was pretty surprised by it. But, after a Super Bowl loss, it's obviously very hard to deal with. So they felt that was the best route to go with to try and improve the following year. And based on what we have now, I guess you could say it was the wrong decision potentially, but we're not going to be fixated on that, but rather the fact that was the last we heard of Steve Wilks in terms of the NFL level. And also most people would recognize him from his time in Arizona as the head coach there in 2018. But he's really done most of his work and has really built up most of his resume doing assistant coach duties for decades, really, right? He's been with 6 different NFL teams. He spent some time at the University of Missouri as well. So for years now, he's been heavily involved in the NFL in different environments, different systems, different players, right? And I think as a coordinator, a defensive coordinator, and just specializing on that, I think that's where he does most of his impactful work. Not to say that he shouldn't get the opportunity to be a head coach, but also I don't think there's a problem with just being a very good coordinator. Like Josh McDaniels jumps to your mind, right? Offensively, as an OC, he's fantastic. Same thing with Arthur Smith. I think he's a lot better as a offensive coordinator than, say, maybe a head coach. And Robert Saleh, it's another one. I think that as a head coach, the situation with the Jets was pretty dicey. But as a defensive coordinator, I think he's going to be very successful just going back to a very familiar position. So in this case scenario with Steve Wilks, I really like this move for the Jets, right? Because not only do you get an experienced guy in your system, right, with all the talent that you have on the defensive side of the ball, bringing in Wilks, that was reportedly Aaron Glenn's first choice. So that's also another positive thing, right? You get the guy that you wanted to get in there. Now you have him, and you can have him work with guys like Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, Quincy Williams, Will McDonald, who had a great year. It's very exciting. And with the level of expertise that he brings, it's also very fortunate because I think with Aaron Glenn and having a new head coach, a pretty young young in terms of NFL years, NFL opportunity, I guess, to dig myself out of the hole. Aaron Glenn is still very new at this, right? The whole head coaching experience, he's never really had that. So to have a older brother sort of experienced voice there working with you, I think is going to be huge for this Jets team to have an experienced, mature in the head coaching realm, just being around more experiences than, say, Aaron Glenn has to this point. I think that's going to be huge for them. And the fact that they're both very defensive minded, right, I think also is going to help develop this relationship and help develop this defense into exactly what Aaron Glenn has in mind, but also Steve Wilks, right? He was pursued for a reason, so there's something about the way he runs things that was very much appreciated by the Jets. And also on that, we mentioned that Aaron Glenn, we talked about his introductory press conference as well, and during that, actually, he said that even though he does come from that defensive background, right, with the Lions, he's actually not going to had any doubts or questions about how much trust Aaron Glenn has in Steve Wilks. That's your answer, pretty much right there, because he's going to let him call the defense to whatever they feel is a compromise as to what they want this defense to look like. So very exciting that they get their top guy in there in Steve Wilks. So that was one of the head coaching, or that's one of the coaching decisions that they made. But then you also have Chris Banjo, who is a pretty relatively young coach who spent most of the last decade actually still playing defensive back on teams like the Packers, the Saints, and the Arizona Cardinals. But after his playing days, he was, introduced to this coaching realm and has been involved heavily, mostly with special teams. And he actually got some interest from the Cowboys and San Francisco this offseason as well. But they both decided to go in different directions. So Chris Banjo leaves Denver and joins Aaron Glenn with the New York Jets. And I believe both hires are great, obviously. I mentioned Wilks, and I think Banjo is in a very good spot where this could be a great opportunity for him just to grow as a young coach in the NFL. But overall, that only leaves offensive coordinator still for the Jets to fill as a vacant spot, which sources believe at this point that Aaron Glenn has a favorite for that so far. And according to these sources, right, a couple of the reports that I read, Aaron Glenn's favorite right now to be his offensive coordinator is Lions' current passing game coordinator, Tanner Engstrand. Tanner Engstrand is the presumed favorite for Aaron Glenn to join him, right, taking another former colleague with the Lions and bringing him over to the New York Jets. He already took, or no, he didn't. Antoine Randall L. joined Ben Johnson in Chicago. Aaron Glenn hasn't taken anybody yet from Detroit, so Tanner Engstrand could be the name that would be next to that offensive coordinator title, potentially with the New York Jets, if it all works out how they want it to. But if Aaron Glenn's not calling the plays on defense, he's certainly not going to call them on offense. So I would also assume this is a great opportunity for Tanner Engstrand to fully call the plays for an NFL team and have an offensive coordinator position would be something awesome for him as well. But lastly here for Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilks, right, I think this team is going to be mainly identified by their defense, at least at the start, right, because there's so many questions with Aaron Rodgers and the quarterback position, and there's still no offensive coordinator, so we don't really have an idea of where this could really go yet. So for the time being, I feel like with a defensive-minded head coach, with a guy like Steve Wilks coming in, another reason to like this is because I feel like the Jets are going to be very much assuming the idea that their identity is going to be mainly based on defense, and I think that's a great foundation to have, right? Having a solid defense and then having everything else play off of that, like your offense and the different components of your team, is a great way to start this project. And just like with the Jets, at one point it felt like they were just stockpiling whoever they could get into the door and just trying to make this work because they were desperate, right? Bringing over Devontae Adams and moves like that, right? Hassan Reddick, another one. It just didn't end up working out for whatever reason. So I think building your team through defense and actually having an established culture and established way of playing that you can identify with, it's gonna be huge for this team that has been kind of trying to navigate through a lot of murky waters with the organization, and the product on the field as well has been pretty disappointing, to say the least. So hopefully with Aaron Glenn, we already praised him for bringing a sort of attitude and persona already to his first press conference, there's already a lot of excitement with that. And bringing on a guy like Steve Wilks, I think only adds to that. So I think the Jets are getting a lot of things right, and they already have a bunch of talent. So it's about putting the puzzle together now, right? I think they're going about it the right way, and it's exciting, honestly. And I think we could actually be excited this year, not like last year where it didn't work out for us. So that is the latest on the coaching cycle and also the latest on this show, because that is what is going to conclude today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys all for joining me on today's episode, and remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show on YouTube at either YouTube channel, the Sports Network channel, and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where you could also follow both of them on all sources, all different types of social media as well. And in terms of this show, again, you can find all that stuff on the YouTube channel, like I said. More NFL coverage, discussions around the league. There's going to be a lot of talk this offseason, especially with the quarterbacks and the draft. You guys know the deal, right? You can find all of that with me, Manny Maradiega, your host on this show each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'll be back here again tomorrow, and I hope to see you guys all back here again joining me to close out the week.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit.